A breech-loading gun is a firearm in which the cartridge or shell is inserted or loaded into a chamber integral to the rear portion of a barrel. Modern mass-production firearms are breech-loading. Early firearms, on the other hand, were almost entirely muzzle-loading. The main advantage of breech-loading is a reduction in reloading time. It is much quicker to load the projectile and the charge into the breech of a gun or cannon than to try to force them down a long tube, especially when the tube has spiral ridges from rifling. In field artillery, breech-loading allows the crew to reload the gun without exposing themselves to enemy fire or repositioning the piece, and allows turrets and emplacements to be smaller. History. Although breech-loading firearms were developed as far back as the late 14th century in Burgundy, breech-loading became more successful with improvements in precision engineering and machining in the 19th century. The main challenge for developers of breech-loading firearms was sealing the breech. This was eventually solved for smaller firearms by the development of the self-contained metallic cartridge. For firearms too large to use cartridges, the problem was solved by the development of the interrupted screw. Swivel guns. Breech-loading swivel guns were invented in the 14th century. They were a particular type of swivel gun, and consisted in a small breech-loading cannon equipped with a swivel for easy rotation, and which could be loaded by inserting a mug-shaped chamber already filled with powder and projectiles. The breech-loading swivel gun had a high rate of fire, and was especially effective in anti-personnel roles. Firearms. Breech-loading firearms are known from the 16th century. Henry VIII possessed one, which he apparently used as a hunting gun to shoot birds. More breech-loading firearms were made in the early 18th century. One such gun, known to have belonged to Philip V of Spain, and was manufactured circa 1715, probably in Madrid. It came with a ready-to-load reusable cartridge. Patrick Ferguson, a British Army officer, developed in 1772 the Ferguson rifle, a breech-loading flintlock firearm. Roughly 200 of the rifles were manufactured and used in the Battle of Brandywine during the American Revolutionary War, but shortly after they were retired and replaced with the standard Brown Bess musket. Later on into the mid-19th century, there were attempts in Europe at an effective breech loader. There were concentrated attempts at improved cartridges and methods of ignition. In Paris in 1808, in association with French gunsmith François Prélat, Jean-Samuel Pauly created the first fully self-contained cartridges. The cartridges incorporated a copper base with integrated mercury fulminate primer powder, a round bullet and either brass or paper casing. The cartridge was loaded through the breech and fired with a needle. The needle-activated central fire breech-loading gun would become a major feature of firearms thereafter. The corresponding firearm was also developed by Pauly. Pauly made an improved version, which was protected by a patent on the 29th of September 1812. The Pauly cartridge was further improved by the French gunsmith Casimir Laforge in 1828 by adding a pinfire primer, but Laforge did not register his patent until 1835. A pinfire cartridge containing powder in a cardboard shell. In 1846, another Paris Frenchman, Benjamin Houllier, patented the first fully metallic cartridge containing powder in a metallic shell. Houllier commercialized his weapons in association with the gunsmiths Blanchard and Charles Robert, but the subsequent Houllier and Laforge cartridges, even if they were the first full metal shells, were still pinfire cartridges, like those used in the Lemmet and Laforge revolvers, although the Lemmet also evolved in a revolver using rim-fire cartridges. A year before Houlier's invention, in 1845, the Frenchman Louis-Nicolas Flaubert invented, for indoor shooting security, the first rimfire metallic cartridge constituted by a bullet fit in a percussion cap. usually derived in the 6mm and 9mm calibers. It is since then called the flow-bear cartridge or the bowscat cartridge, but it doesn't contain any powder. The only propellant substance contained in the cartridge is the percussion cap itself. In English-speaking countries, the flow-bear cartridge corresponds to the 22 BB and 22 CB ammunitions. The first centerfire cartridge was introduced in 1855 by Pottet, with both burden and boxer priming. In 1842, the Norwegian armed forces adopted the breech-loading caplock, the camelader, one of the first instances in which a modern army widely adopted a breech-loading rifle as its main infantry firearm. The Draces und Nadelgewehre Dracer needle gun was a single-shot breech-loading rifle using a rotating bolt to seal the breech. It was so called because of its 5-inch needle-like firing pin, which passed through paper cartridge case to impact a percussion cap at the bullet base. It began development in the 1830s under von Dracer, and eventually an improved version of it was adopted by Prussia in the late 1840s. The paper cartridge and the gun had numerous deficiencies, specifically serious problems with gas leaking. However, the rifle was used to great success in the Prussian army in the Austro-Prussian War of 1866. This, and the Franco-Prussian War of 1870–71, eventually caused much interest in Europe for breech-loaders and the Prussian military system in general. In 1860, the New Zealand government petitioned the Colonial Office for more soldiers to defend Auckland. The bid was unsuccessful, and the government began instead making inquiries to Britain to obtain modern weapons. In 1861 they placed orders for the Kalash and Terry carbine, which used a breech-loading system using a bullet consisting of a standard mini-lead bullet in .54 caliber backed by a charge and tallowed wad, wrapped in nitrated paper to keep it waterproof. The carbine had been issued in small numbers to English cavalry from 1857. About 3–4,000 carbines were brought into New Zealand a few years later. The carbine was used extensively by the Forest Rangers, an irregular force led by Gustavus von Tempsky that specialized in bush warfare and reconnaissance. Von Tempsky liked the short carbine, which could be loaded while lying down. The waterproof cartridge was easier to keep dry in the New Zealand bush. Museums in New Zealand hold a small number of these carbines in good condition. During the American Civil War, at least 19 types of breech loader were fielded. The Sharps used a successful dropping block design. The Green used rotating bolt action, and was fed from the breech. The Spencer, which used lever-actuated bolt action, was fed from a 7-round detachable tube magazine. The Henry and Volcanic used rim-fire metallic cartridges fed from a tube magazine under the barrel. These held a significant advantage over muzzle loaders. The improvements in breech loaders had spelled the end of muzzle loaders. To make use of the enormous number of war surplus muzzle loaders, the Allen conversion Springfield was adopted in 1866. General Burnside invented a breech-loading rifle before the war. The French adopted the new Chassepot rifle in 1866, which was much improved over the needle gun as it had dramatically fewer gas leaks due to its debang sealing system. The British initially took the existing Enfield and fitted it with the Snyder breech action firing the boxer cartridge. Following a competitive examination of 104 guns in 1866, the British decided to adopt the Peabody-derived Martini-Henry with trapdoor loading in 1871. Single-shot breech loaders would be used throughout the latter half of the 19th century. but were slowly replaced by various designs for repeating rifles. First used in the American Civil War, manual breech loaders gave way to manual magazine feed and then to self-loading rifles. Artillery. The first modern breech-loading rifled gun is a breech loader invented by Martin von Warendorf with a cylindrical breech plug secured by a horizontal wedge in 1837. In the 1850s and 1860s, Whitworth and Armstrong invented improved breech-loading artillery. The M1867 naval guns produced in Imperial Russia at the Obukhov State Plant used Krupp technology.